Today is the last session of our One World or None special topic series, and therefore we will do a review of our last two speakers' topics as well as conclude this section. Over the past 2 weeks, we had some very dear guest speakers who reviewed with us the challenges and methods of pulling oneself out of dangerous undue influences such as a cult, as well as how experiencing and interpreting our minds through the arts can promote cultural and political healing. They highlighted both the vulnerabilities and powers of the collective nature of our consciousness. First, Dr. Stephen Hassan, a leading expert on cults and author of The Cult of Trump, shared his personal and professional journey in understanding authoritarian influence. Once a member of the Unification Church, or the Moonies, he described how coercive persuasion reshaped his identity and how his later reemergence led him to formulating his influential BITE model, that is, analyzing behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. He emphasized that authoritarian control, whether in cults or politics, functions like mind control, where control of information reshapes thought and identity. He highlighted how fourth and fifth generation psychological warfare, once used by the US abroad, is now being deployed domestically, undermining trust in science, experts, and democracy itself. Authoritarianism spreads like contagious disease, and so public education could not be more important. It is also critical to develop an ability to distinguish between ethical and unethical influence, to resist censorship, and to build resilience by strengthening our bonds with one another. Next, Dr. Hattie Myers, psychoanalyst and founding editor of Room, a sketchbook for analytic action, discussed how she helped mobilize using psychoanalysis and the arts to help heal our culture and our politics. She emphasized that Sigmund Freud credited poets and artists with revealing the unconscious far before analysts did. And she calls for us to step outside of our silos to collaborate across disciplines. Room began in 2016 as a response to the anxiety following Donald Trump's first election, growing from a small newsletter into an international platform, showcasing writing, community projects, and cross-cultural exchanges. The journal's organic process reflects a way we can form therapeutic processes that meet the needs of our day. Initiatives have included podcasts, global roundtables, and encrypted publishing for vulnerable voices, such as Afghan women, and interfaith dialogues, such as Israeli-Palestinian collaborations. Fostering creativity and community building are essential to countering despair and fragmentation, as well as creating a living space for transformation. At my last review, we left off with the idea of creating frames, the structure or boundaries of safety that allow the self-observer and collective self-observer to function and to resist any effects of unwanted contagion. These frames are not ends in themselves, but transitional structures that preserve health until trust, wholeness, and oneness can be restored. This is what therapists do. In fact, they consider little of the content, but rather focus on the frame, so that whatever content clients wish to fill this protective space with, they can. The same applies to our collective consciousness. As we develop a new awareness of humanity's oneness, we need to protect it and to allow room from which it can grow and expand. I will try to illustrate this through 3 interwoven principles: power, peace, and love. I've chosen these themes as essential nutrients for the human soul, as indispensable as food, water, or air. If we do not nurture them, violence can spread, fragmentation proliferate and the death spiral of authoritarian reign accelerate. Once they are established, however, we can begin to soften boundaries as fear dissipates and humanity is restored to its original state of health, which is unity. But not before. It is first important to establish a structure, to recognize that violence is not strength, but mimicry. It is a desperate attempt to disguise fear, weakness, and shame. False power, which I also call guised power, feeds on paranoia, the perception of threat where none really exists or is exaggerated. This kind of power struts, intimidates, and consumes, but it is hollow and can never produce or create. Its very need to brandish itself gives away its fragility. Once you recognize this and bring a firm frame that distinguishes between false and true power, the so-called power of the false melts away. Next, it is important to recognize that peace is our natural state. If we have perfect peace, nothing can touch us. And equanimity is a source from which all true power arises. Hence, we need to build strict boundaries to guard this peace from a world of endless, self-generated complications and conflicts. We also need to understand that when we are unbalanced, we develop a tendency to project enemies and threats where none exist. Hence, retaining our balance and grounding is one of our most urgent tasks, which involves, paradoxically, taking time away from the frenzy of activities, to take care of ourselves, to take the time to look at a flower, to sing a tune, and to spend time with loved ones simply for the enjoyment. Ultimately, love is our greatest power. One may also notice that love is the greatest target of authoritarian regimes that are intent on disempowering the public in order to dominate. One can see it in the targeting of parent-child bonds at the US-Mexico border. We can see it in the polarization of political parties. And we can see it in the fragmentation of society through the rousing of suspicion and fear. On the other hand, if we can protect and retain our practice and belief in love, almost anything is possible. The greatest show of force cannot produce life, and no edict or law can affirm our shared existence, like love can. Ultimately, it gives rise to the greatest power, the capacity to see the other as oneself. This is how our oneness begins, as does peace, prosperity, and true power. To develop this capacity, we must first establish firm boundaries. We have seen how, deprived of love, people grasp at domination, destruction, or the false intimacy of cult-like submission. Where love is present, the need for violence vanishes. In my 25 years of experience treating violent offenders, I have learned that even the most hardened criminal will not engage in violence if one does not have to. One does not need to prove one's worth through attack, when the worth is already established through belonging. And one does not need to hoard when abundance is shared. This is what we need to learn and can teach one another. At the highest level, unity becomes oneness, the recognition that all beings are expressions of the same underlying life. This is not a mystical afterthought, but a foundational necessity of our time. The solution to our existential predicament is certainly not more sophisticated weaponry, not more surveillance, and not even more negotiation. It is a shift in awareness, a collective remembrance of our natural state of health, peace, love, and unity.